Hello.
Hello.
So UserVision.
Yes.
I'd like to know what is it? What do you do? Take from there, kind of thing.
Okay. So the description of UserVision has changed from its initial days as the market has evolved. But we're a user experience and service design consultancy. We're a leading consultancy in that field. We're based in Edinburgh, but with satellite offices in London and in Dubai as well. A lot of clients there. And that's really what we do. It's all about trying to improve the user experience, whether that's through interfaces or processes, which really makes a nod towards this other area of service design, which is really integral to it all as well.
And how long have you been going for?
Since 2000, which I always surprise myself when I hear myself say that, because it seems just like yesterday. But since it's 22 years now. Yes, and that's what I mean. The things have changed quite a lot, obviously, technology-wise, but I would say attitudes-wise towards what we do, which has been an interesting journey in itself.
Yeah. I'd like to hear about it. So how did it all start back in 2000?
It started in that it started with a bank at the time that was quite the project going on here in Edinburgh. It was called Intelligent Finance, and many people were working very, very hard to put together an online bank in the days when there was really hardly any proper online banks. And this one had a fairly unique proposition and a few things. And the team that was leading it, one person in particular, said, you know what, in addition to all these clever technologists that are trying to put this together and back-end devs and all sorts, we need to make sure it has a good user experience. They probably didn't use those words. They said we have to get someone to look after the usability.
Yeah,
the terminology we use has changed a bit in our field. So basically, they put out a call for that sort of thing. And I decided that I was going to point my life up here to Edinburgh. I've been living in London for the past 10 years. And so I answered that call, and I remember going for an interview, and even the recruiter at that stage was really sort of, he kind of said, this is interesting. It's I've never really had a request for this kind of thing, and I've never had anyone who's kind of offering that service. And he kind of put the two together, and that was it. That was the origins of it. And for the first about a year and a half, that was the main project, and it was me. But I realized that there's a lot more, obviously, that's needed than this company with a bit of forethought to actually request it. So I needed to set a limited company to do that, and I started looking around for other work and starting talking to others and giving a lot of free training courses and seminars to raise awareness, a lot of market education about it, and trying to see if anyone else could be interested in this field, and not so much the technology side of it. There's plenty of technologists out there, but more about how do you actually make sure that your technology is going to work for the end users. And fortunately, quite a few people were interested in that, and they said that's exactly our problem. It's not that that we can't create technology that works and stuff. It's just that we sometimes create it and it's not understood.
Yeah, no one likes to use it.
Yeah, and then if we're lucky, we might get the feedback and we might actually change it. But so it was really, I realized that there was a gap in the market, for that. There have been relatively few, most of them based in the US, companies that offered that kind of service. And for a more sort of, I guess you'd say, an enlightened company that is self-aware enough to realize that everything that they're creating is not necessarily going to be perfect just because it works technically. That the human element is at least as important as all of that. If the user can't use it or won't use it, it just doesn't work. Just in the same way as, if you've got some coding error or something like that. So that message has really been, stayed the same, even though the technical environment's changed in all these years. So ended up getting within a year or two, had quite a really enviable set of clients. Some other big banks and computer companies. Various types there. So in public sector as well. As more of them heard about it, and as the field and the need for user experience grew, it was the right time. In a way, it felt like it wasn't the right time because it was just around the time the tech bubble was bursting. If you remember, way back then, you had all sorts of things that were coming out, and internet business propositions about all sorts of things.
Anything with the .com and then
the .com bubble, and a lot of them were pretty spurious, and some of them, even the high-profile ones. The most high-profile one is there's one particular example, boo.com, that was very flashy and everything, but it was incredibly difficult to use. So I sometimes use that as the poster child for what was going wrong at the time. It was just like, it wasn't built around the user needs at all. So people were realizing that was one of the reasons why that things were not working out so well, is that the technology was not in line with user expectations. There was that period of adjustment. People became aware of it, and that was it. The company's grown organically since then. We've not gone out and taken in investor sets or anything like that. It's all grown organically and reinvested in itself, and it just grew from there. From a core of clients, primarily in either public sector, financial services. Those have been the two strongest bases, from those earliest days, and those are still, I would say, our two main areas. Quite a bit in travel and e-commerce, as well as other interesting areas like charity and other sort of third sector areas. And it's that variety, actually, for me, and I believe for the team as well. It just keeps it interesting. The fact that you can be within a typical week thinking about a few projects in highly different sectors.
Yeah, keeps you fresh, right?
Yeah, it does. So so in a rather large nutshell, that's how it all came about.
Yeah, and so that's massive staying power. Keeping the business around that long. What's the passion for it? What makes you believe in user experience is so important?
I think there's sort of two halves to what's keeping me motivated 22 years later with it. And one is let's call it the craft, and then there's the enterprise. The enterprise being the business, and just any business challenge, like, okay, how are we doing? Revenues, where's your clients coming from? All of that, which is pretty common to many businesses, regardless of what you do. So there's that part of me that likes, okay, I like the challenges and learning lessons when I get things wrong or not, and all sorts of things. And that's great. But the other half is really all about the area that we work in. The domain of user experience is all about people. You're trying to design or optimize the design of things, taking into account the capabilities and limitations of people. And I think that plays well to my sort of personality and my training. I guess way back when in college, I was studying, I think it was mechanical engineering. It didn't really grab me. I was pretty good at the maths and all that and physics, and I was like, okay, I'll definitely get a job, a really practical job. But I happened to be taking a psychology course as an elective, and that's what really grabbed me. And I said, if I could find some way of combining these two. Yeah. And I did. I just happened to be at the right place where they had a degree course in engineering psychology, which is effectively user experience under a different name, slightly less usable name, I would say. They had silly names like human-computer interaction and off-putting things like that. I kind of said, right, that's an interesting area, and it's a needed area. I mean, the context back then was, again, very different. And I really feel fortunate that here I am, many years later, still working in that field, where the challenge is how can you design things that are going to click with someone, will make it as easy as possible, understood, give them confidence in whatever they're trying to do, whether that's booking a hotel room or doing something on an intranet, whatever it might be, and the context can vary. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The fact that it's tied back to a human and very directly to a human, that's the other part to it. So there's the enterprise and there's the craft, which is the fact that I'm doing something rather humanizing the technology, as it were. Yeah, it's so important, right? I mean, early on when we started ClearScan, even my career, I was a software developer, so coming from the back end. Yes. But early on, very much an understanding of we need UX UI design, right? Because it's not about throwing buttons up on a screen and then getting someone to click through it.
And a lot of the time the problem masquerades in other ways with people we talk to. For example, if I'm talking to, say, a large energy utility client and they say, our users don't want to engage digitally. And I'm like,
how do you know that?
Yeah. Well, do they want to sit on hold on a call?
Yes.
Is that what they want? Really?
Yeah.
Is that what they really want?
Yeah.
And it's like, getting the skin of it. Well, why don't they want to interact with you digitally? And normally it's because there's very little thought gone into the digital journey.
The way they currently engage isn't answering the questions. It's leaving too many, unanswered questions in their head. So and that really introduces the whole world of user needs, capturing the user needs, which is typically the starting point for any kind of user-centered design process, is really learning about the users, their contexts, and from that, giving yourself a roadmap, as it were, for what are the requirements for our system in order to meet those requirements, these things we've discovered about our users. And then sort of the other main area of user-centered design is saying, okay, now that we have a better idea of what we need to do to design to meet these user needs, well, how's that going to work? And that's when you get into the interface design and priority of content and buttons and calls to action and all these things that we can see as appropriate. But the key thing is that it's as appropriate, as informed by the users and the requirements you've taken on. And then making sure you're doing that carefully, being not in such a rush to get it out the door that you don't kind of test it with the users or evaluate it in some ways. Testing is perhaps the best way to get some empirical evidence of it. But and that's one of the challenges, and of course it varies with clients as to what degree it goes under the scrutiny at that stage. But so that whole area of evaluating things is a critical part to it as well.
Yeah, and very difficult to get right. One of the values of Clear Sky is the simplicity. So the way we communicate between teams with clients, that sort of thing, but in our technology and design of it as well. But a lot of times people mistake simplicity for the easy, and simplicity is super difficult.
Well, it's hard to make something that is inherently complex appear easy. That's the trickery in a way. Now you need to break it down in a way. I sometimes simplify it down to, I call them the 2 C words, giving them a sense of control and sense of confidence. So sense of control kind of speaks to, does the person feel like they're going, did they feel like they're just having to play a game that they don't really know what's going on, And I guess confidence is very much related to that. Do I feel like I'm going in the right direction? And that is something we have to judge and evaluate at a deep level in things like usability testing and say, okay, is this system giving control and confidence to the user as they try to find information, go through a process? And the process is likely to be, these days, not necessarily all contained in that one website. Or, it could be, now we're going across multi-channels, to do things. And this is where it speaks more towards service design. Your interface with the organization and its service is less likely to be just a one-stop shop. Let me just go there, boom, I'm done. Even when you buy things on e-commerce, the whole point from there until you it gets delivered and you check out the product, etc. That's all part of it as well. That's all within the remit. And it used to be a bit more fragmented. People would say, okay, well, my part has to do with this little segment, and that's me done. But I think what's been really refreshing is many companies, as they've discovered user experience and service design, are recognizing, taking on the responsibility to actually, join these silos and actually say, okay, we are going to make sure the user has an end-to-end good experience. Now that's a bit harder to test in a typical usability lab session. There's other ways that we can do it. That's why we've got various tools in our toolbox to do that. But it's great to see companies, because that fragmented view was relatively unhelpful. To say, well, my part's done. It's no longer like that.
And is that all about building, from a user point of view, building up the trust of the user, that if it's consistent, the interactions with the company? Is that? Yeah,
trust is a big part to it. No one's going to engage with the company unless they have a good sense of trust with it, and that is hard to actually create. especially if it's a rather new service that they've never really heard of, or they've heard of, but they can't quite imagine how it's going to work. And it might get to a little critical point. Oh, at this stage, in order to, I don't know, take advantage of something like open banking. Okay, that's fine, interesting. I get the proposition, see everything in one shot there. I've got to share all my bank details to this other company here in order to get this whole thing to work. I'm going to have to think about that. And then how do you build up that level of trust that is going to work? And that's a really subtle aspect that companies struggle with. It's not a simple marketing blitz that's going to convince them just because they've seen your logo everywhere.
Trust is a lot. Trust is a lot.
Yeah.
Saying I'm going to not trust you.
Exactly. So you need to carefully pick apart, well, what is it that's kind of, where's the chink in the armor here for the lack of trust that you're feeling? Well, and they may articulate it fairly well, they being the end user you're talking with, or they may not. There's a lot of sort of inferred trying to understand what the user's trying to say, and actually translating that onto the business itself. Now, when you say the business, that's typically talking to, it could be the business analysts who often have a very key role in making sure that things are translated towards that technology team, and the business planners and the product owners, in that case. So actually making sure that all these others have enough awareness and fluency in speaking user experience as well. It used to be, I'd say a few years ago, people would say, oh, you just get a UX person and you're all set. And they sometimes would have a slightly unfortunate role of, I call it like being the UX police. They're embedded in with a design team and they go around with a waggy finger and say, oh, no, your call to action isn't in the right place, or something to that effect. And they probably don't make too many friends in doing that. So they, like in any line of business or life, you need to build up your allies and doing a degree of sort of evangelizing about it all. Like, here's why we're having to do this. And if you can back that up with things like, here's a little snippet from a usability test that it's not just one person, but a few people ran into this. And that's when that helps the penny to drop. I always, when I'm talking to other UX professionals, we sometimes have a joke and say, do you find yourself in the role of being the UX police? I've been in that role, and it's an awkward one to be in sometimes. So it's all part of the fun.
Everyone's got a say, right? In design, the technical side of the team's coming back saying, well, we don't think that's right. And like, well, that's what the users are saying,
Well, that's it. I mean, what's the phrase people say? Is like, it's you're dealing with people's opinions, and opinions are, everyone's opinions are like elbows. Everyone's got a couple of them, and they're only of any use to you, really. And it's something like that. And opinions need to be validated, and that's a lot of what we do at that sort of, at that evaluation stage. Is just saying, okay, well, let's see, let's get the evidence of this. Even if it's from a relatively small number of people. We're often doing testing with maybe 5 people from a distinct user group. And it's not a quantitative thing. But if it's done right, it will show you the trends and show you the qualitative reasons why that's really working or not working for this particular set of users. And the key thing is to learn from that stage and iterate. Everyone loves the word iterate and marries it with agile and says, look at us, here we go, we're iterating, etc. So that's the whole idea, is that yes, you do learn from a small set of people, you fix them and you change it, hopefully relatively soon, and you test it again and again. And that's another big change that I've seen happen. It used to be that people would be doing, let's say that, again, the evaluation, the usability testing would be a typical request. And they'd actually, sometimes we call it validation. Can you do some validation testing with my end users? And I would just think, well, we're not necessarily going to validate. I can't promise that I'm going to validate.
Maybe invalidating.
It may give you some tough questions to answer here. But it's often kind of left to, we're launching in 2 weeks. Can you do a usability test to make sure that everything's going to be working great? And so, okay, we'll see if we can fit it in, and everything. But more people are getting it early in the design process, because you can do it from a very early stage, even before you've actually made an interface design. You're playing around with, I don't know, the navigation system, which at that stage is, you know, a bunch of words, you know, and you can do some great things to make sure that that's going to hang together right. It's this whole world, a sub-world of what we do is called information architecture. Has really nothing to do with the layout and the design, certainly not the colors, but all the semantics of the words, you know, of people navigating a site. We've all been lost on them. And it's typically because you thought that one would give me stuff that I'm assuming is within there, and you're getting it wrong. Now, that's always going to be a challenge, but there's a lot of those challenges can be you know, refined earlier on in the process by looking at the grouping and labeling of this, and that's another really interesting area of user experience as well.
And have you seen companies be more open to that over the years of UserVision than at the beginning?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say one of the main changes is that certainly in the early days of websites and even actually I'd say even more so with internal systems, is that there tended to be a real correlation between sort of the department names and sort of the names that ended up on the menu in you know, on the website. You know, it's like, okay. And it just that's it's all kind of a byproduct of that siloing of things. And as people have realized that it's an end-to-end journey that the user is going through, we need to you know, make sure that the user isn't feeling like they're having to just jump from one department to the next. Perhaps the highest profile example of that is government digital services from the UK government. About 10 years ago, did a radical change to the way they thought of it, because it is very divided up into departments. It is still in different departments, but at least at the top level, you're getting a pretty coherent journey-led process that the user can follow. So you're speaking about the user's journey. Now, if that journey needs to draw on, say you've got a process of, I don't know, starting a business or something, that might need some things from licensing and some things from, I don't know, property areas. Instead of jumping them from pillar to post, trying to give them a good seamless journey that overlays that. And you can dive into the other ones as needed. But I think it's a very, obviously a very vast area that, or example of that. But I think that's one, because the government was synonymous with like, oh, that's someone else, that's not my job and stuff. And that's changed quite a bit. And I think that it's a good example of it.
Yeah, and I don't know what happened about kind of maybe between 10 and 15 years ago. There's a lot of platforms we come across now, whether it be internal facing to businesses or maybe just not that many end users in it, where there's almost no user experience going into it at all. Where a user basically logs in, you know, the login page, fine, nice and clean and tidy. You log in and then the user just got to imagine what to do next. You know, they just present loads of options. It's over to you, user. I hope you know why you're here.
Yes, yeah.
It's so common. Most systems I see of that, say 10 years ago, are still in operation and look like that.
Yeah, well, a lot of it is, and we have a few projects that from time to time that are effectively upgrading legacy systems that were fairly user hostile.
User hostile, that's it.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm trying to describe.
They're tech friendly and user hostile, you know, in a way. And that's great. It's, you know, it's a few years late, but the penny has dropped, and people realize that that's what needs to be done. I think, you know.
I think it's the impact when you take something like that and then you start to make it more around the user, more like signposting them of, okay, so the user's logged in. Why have they logged in? Are they here to pay a bill? Let's make that really easy and you know, straightforward to do. What's the kind of biggest impact you've seen maybe in a specific project or something like that, where you've been, you know what, I got involved, it's like this, and by the end of working with UserVision, it's now like this?
Yeah, it's usually a series of various changes that collectively make a big difference. So, I can think of one with a travel company, a large airline, that we've had a few projects where, you know, for them, it's a commercial thing. And that's one of the areas of interest. You know, with public sector, it's less overtly, immediately a commercial thing. It's usually information provision. But with this kind of business, it is. You know, how can we get more people booked onto flights? They're managing their own bookings. And there were some clever propositions for how to be doing a new way of representing a pricing structure. and it seemed to make sense from the business point of view, but because it was more complex, as you were giving more options to the user, and this is common, I'd say, in different guises, what the user wants is more choices. Well, the more choices you give them, then you really need to start being really careful how you model and represent these choices, so you don't start to lose the confidence of the user, where they feel flummoxed, like, what's the relative benefit of each of these choices, etc. And that, in summary, without going into the details, that was it. And we kind of helped to, I'd say, avert a rather substantial, launch of something that would have been really, really quite suboptimal. And we got enough evidence to say, you really don't want to do that. You could, but it's, from our prediction here, you're going to be losing a lot of people, and they're going to be calling your call center at best, or they're going to be going to your competitors at worst. And that worked out. And they made substantial changes. There was a lot of grumbling. Not everyone was entirely happy. And this is one of the things, as in any line of business, and especially technology, a lot of people will pour their heart into things. They'll fall in love with their own design. You see this all the time. Well, you can't, how can you criticize this? I think it works great.
Perfect.
Well, yes, you've been working on it for the past 6 months. You probably see it in your sleep, and you know how to use it back to front. This is a first-time user, using it. So it's that type of thing where you do need to rather diplomatically let people know in an evidence-based way why this isn't going to work. So, in one hand, speaking to the designer in a way that they get it and don't feel affronted, but also, on the other hand, speaking to the business in a more commercial way and say, look, if you did do this, let's predict this is what it's going to be costing you and getting you if you did launch it this way. But if you did it this other way, it'll probably delay things a bit. It might cost a little bit more, but it's going to work out better. And you're asking everyone to look into a bit of a crystal ball here. That was one that I think was quite gratifying, because it did change. It made a real big change to their direction, which is fairly preordained. It was they're kind of fairly down that path, and they said we need to take not entirely 90 degree, but a fairly substantial change in the design and layout and the order of the information that was presented to the user, specifically to build up the user's confidence in that process of booking a flight. And being able to choose between which options they were going to be getting. So that, to me, is one. I know I can't show you the examples and stuff, but it was quite interesting.
I think the idea around the confidence and trust in a flight booking journey is super important, right? That's the start of someone's holiday, and if it goes wrong and they've not booked it correctly, it's going to have a disastrous effect on the feedback for the airline. Quite often I see companies where they almost get fixated on the wrong thing. And giving some context, they're fixated that a project has to be live by a date. But really the stakeholders don't want a project going live. They want the impact on the revenue or the better customer reviews, and so sometimes it's trying to guide them away from you're focused on the wrong thing.
Yes, exactly. Well, perhaps this is, you could call it, this is the kind of more of a debate to have down in the pub sort of thing, but it's just is this an accidental sort of casualty of the agile sprint driven process, which is very much driven by technology. We're going to have 2-week sprints, and there's a certain cadence that you're trying to get through, and the expected thing is get something out the door. It's less of an emphasis on getting the right thing for the user out the door. Not to say that Agile and UX are diametrically opposed, they're not, but it can be a little bit hard because there's some fairly loud voices to saying just get it out the door. I always picture UX as something to do with like volume of like an amplifier or a mixer or something like that. In a typical project, you've got 2 really loud voices that are having this conversation. It could be like you and I, and those are the business and the technology team. And often the people like the BA, business analysts, are doing kind of a shuttle diplomacy between the two. And the business saying, well, we need to do this because our investors want this, or this is the way we've always done it on the phone system and we're putting it online. Over to you, technology, what can you do for me? And then they'll say, well, okay, we're going to be building in .NET because that's our bag. And, and they'll talk technology, and business goes, okay, I kind of understand that. But and they have a very loud conversation between business needs, technology requirements, opportunities they might be talking to. There's so much to talk about there. The volume is cacophonous in the room. Meanwhile, you got the users there like, hello.
And the thing with them, so you get MVP bandied around the place. And you're like, so minimum viable product. Viable for who?
Yes.
Is it the end user, or is it the business, or is it the technology team that's doing it? You know.
Yes. So what we need to do is turn up the volume of that, on that mixer or something, so the user's volume is raised up there as well. And it's interesting you say MVP, because that's again a real whammy word in our field, isn't it? But we tend to be calling it minimal viable experience. Mm-hmm. So necessarily, the user's looking for an experience. They aren't necessarily looking for a bit of technology. They aren't looking for a website. They want to have a good experience, which is their problem, large or small, to be solved or assuaged in some way. And that's it. So we try to implant that idea into clients to say, to actually steer away from, stop patting yourself on the back because you've delivered a thing, which is minimum product. Great, okay, well done. But to what degree have you, having assessed and understood those user needs in terms of their experience they want to have, how far down that line are you in terms of meeting those experience needs rather than your product needs? It comes down to outputs versus outcomes. Many technology companies and businesses that are their patrons are much more interested in outputs. Hey, here's another new thing to do. Hey, we have an app now, so you can track this, that, and the other thing. The user's interested in an outcome. They may not articulate that themselves in those words, but reading between the lines, the user wants an outcome, which is typically a solution to a problem that they may or may not realize that they have at that stage. Once you shine a light on it, you might make them realize that, oh yeah, that is a real problem. You mean you can solve that?
Yes. And that passion for problem solving, that's why I'm in this industry as well. I think it all comes from early in my career when I was just and even before that, when I was like at school or something like that, and I just loved like computers and that sort of thing, and becoming like the go-to person in the family, like if there's a problem with the computer or something to set up, and then having that kind of like superpower to help people. If I'd been more academically aligned, maybe we'd been a doctor or something, but I'm good at technology, so that's what we do. But you get the kick you get out of that problem solving when you're at the scale of solving it for companies or thousands of users, or it's a good reason to keep going.
And that's one of the things that I really get a buzz out of is when you see a website that's been changed and you can see the improvements there. That's great. That's really gratifying. We're not the front-end web designers. We aren't creating the pixel perfect things, but we heavily influence that. We typically work directly with web design companies as well as their clients. The end company, and it's just really gratifying. And it's gratifying for me. It's gratifying for the people that are part of the team. That's what I really try and connect the dots there, when a few months down the line and something gets launched and stuff, to let that consultant know that they've worked on that. Look at this, they've launched it. Isn't that cool? They've actually put that in there. Isn't that good? And if they can puff out their chest and say, well done, I certainly do. I think that's great. I like trying to deliver that degree of satisfaction to the team as well, to point out what they're doing is good in its own way.
Yeah, because it's not just the variation is one thing, that's good going between industries, and that keeps people interested. But also like sometimes it's the validation, when real users are on it. So I like working in technology that actually goes live and real users touch every day and it's part of their lives. And the validation is sometimes refreshing in good ways and bad ways. So sometimes we release a new feature and we're like, okay, can you give us the customer feedback that's coming in? And you're like, oh, right, okay. They want to use it in a different way from what you'd expected, and you've got to listen to that and get better and make sure we understand that earlier in time.
And that's great to be, it's great that you are self-aware. I tend to use that word a lot, but to recognize that, okay, we didn't get it right the first time, and not everyone is that is willing to do that. Again, they'll point out, look, I got a thing out. did you get the thing out that was needed? You know?
Yeah, that's so important. So in terms of the your journey with UserVision, what would you say was the biggest challenge over the course of the?
Gosh, we've had quite a few. I'd say, you know, in those early days, as I kind of intimated, it was trying to seed the market. Educate the market. I'd say, you know, people would say, because we tended to not call it user experience, which is the watchword nowadays. It's strange how the terminology's changed. It tended to be more about like usability, and then accessibility, which is a point I'm also quite passionate about. And that was just really coming onto the scene. But when you talk about usability, people would interpret it in their own way. You know, you tried to explain what we do, and usability being made up of, you know, effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction, which is a slightly academic way of looking at it. And they go, all right, so you're the ones that make sure it looks pretty and stuff. Not quite, you know. And then it got to the point of saying people would, actually there was a year or two there where the people are trying to set up this counter narrative and trying to say that it's either usability or design. You know, which side are you on? Do you want it to be usable or do you want it to look nice? You know? I remember once being asked to be in some kind of panel debate thing, where it was just going to be like me and one other person, and I was going to be flying the flag for usability as it was, and they were they were designer, graphic designer, whatever. They could do all that, and you know, I don't really have skills in that area, and there was going to be someone kind of moderating and say, okay, well, which side, and setting up questions, and I just kind of said, you know what, this whole thing, I don't like it, because it's not like you're trying to pose this. It's a false
adversarial,
contrast.
right?
Yeah. And it's, you know, you can actually have a good design that looks visually nice and also a good user experience. So that you know, people quickly got over that. That was kind of 20 years ago or so. But then along came, you know, the things that affected us all, the recession of 12 years ago or so, more. And then, you know, other things that caused companies to put the brakes on. And that's everything from, you know, here in Scotland, the referendum made companies go, well, hang on, we're going to look into, we have to basically hold off on doing something that is a bit on the cutting edge, which is the kind of things that are more likely to need some UX input because they're a bit innovative, you know. So we're going to hold off on doing that. So between that, Brexit, of course, and then hot on its heels as you know, COVID. You know, we were really just very much hitting our stride when COVID came along. Things were really, you know, getting a lot more sort of long-term clients. We've always had lots of repeat clients. We've had some for, you know, 16, 18 years or so, you know. But we're getting longer-term projects and things. And then brakes get put on for COVID. So those have been the main challenges, as well as things that all companies deal with in our field, finding the right people and all of that. Which is critically important. I would say that's perhaps the most important thing. You know, I always want to be getting the right people that know what they're doing, that actually like the role of being a consultant as well, and are able to explain things to clients and do that whole role. There's the technical side in a way of what we do, even though we're not sort of technologists in a hardcore sense. But there's the ability to explain what you do. Both in a verbal way, giving presentations, and also, you know, we write a lot of reports as well. So what's the most convincing, compelling way? So some people really take to that and they really like it, and other people are, no, I just want to, I don't know, do designs. So finding the right people, you want it to be a match both ways, has been, you know, that's always been a challenge, but it's a great challenge because we have a great team of people, and I love seeing them self-educate and cross-fertilize knowledge and all of that. It's to me that's really gratifying. And now that we're starting to return to the office a lot more, and seeing just even people having a chat with each other and all that kind of stuff, something you don't get from a Zoom meeting. Has been really nice. You know, it felt quite, you know, a year or so ago was feeling a bit like, oh man, there's only so many Zoom meetings we can go through with each other.
Can't do it anymore.
Yeah, so it's picking up again.
Yeah, I was in the office on Friday last week, and it was full.
Well, yeah.
For the first time I've been there, it's been full anyway. So we tried to go back kind of like 2 or 3 days a week and that sort of thing. But I remember on Friday I turned around and there's that kind of background chatter in the office that you just get with people being together, sharing ideas.
Yeah.
Like 2 of the people were up at a whiteboard, but everyone else was kind of listening in. It's like, yeah, this is why I do what I do.
Gold dust for me. I love being in our sort of back office, having the door open and just hearing people, whatever, telling jokes, saying what they did over the weekend, or just chatting about a project. And so, what would you hear? What would you do? All this kind of stuff, which is hard to do with a Zoom thing or Teams or whatever. So yes, I love hearing the buzz.
Yeah. So I mean, we're definitely hybrid. 2 or 3 days a week in the office.
That's really what we are too.
And I think every company will be kind of different, and they'll get in their own swing with it. But for me, it's kind of why we're here. We're a team, right? We're not a group of individuals that do our thing. We're a team that delivers outstanding results.
Absolutely. That whole kind of feeding into each other and building it up, giving little case studies of your work, etc. I love doing that. Yeah. And
in terms of UserVision, what's next?
I think the field is evolving. The field of user experience and service design. It's evolving in reflection of the experiences people are wanting to have, which is the technology that's underpinning it all. 12 years ago, whatever, more than that. Date myself. Mobiles came on the scene, and or the iPhone did, and that completely changed things. And we've had virtual realities and voice things. So it's keeping abreast of those, trying to do more projects in that field and trying to work with clients to get them to expand their opportunities to go into those areas as well in a user-centered way. So, the business is going quite well right now. The awareness of what we can do is going well. So we're just going to keep doing it, and I think work in our core field areas and keeping those going and finding some new clients in those areas as well. We've got some interesting partners both domestically and internationally, and I think we could be exploiting those a little bit better. So the international work is one that I wouldn't mind exploring a little bit more as well. So yeah, it's a good time coming out of this relative hibernation of COVID. Well, it wasn't hibernation, but it was a tougher time. People had other priorities, understandably.
Yeah, that creative side of things was really difficult. Okay, cool. So in terms of UserVision, why would I get in touch? If I'm a big company or a small company, why would I get in touch with UserVision?
Yeah, it's. I think if you are dealing with a problem, you're trying to put something out for which the success is going to be largely defined by will people want to use it and are they able to use it, that's where we can really help. We've been able to, as I said, we've worked with many clients for many years, 18, 20 years, and they keep coming back because we add the value of insight and experience-led design that is beneficial to them. It's an investment, but it's an investment that pays back. And so if you realize that the success of your product or service is going to rely heavily on the users choosing to use it and understanding the process and understanding your interface, then that's the time to come see us. Ideally, the earlier the better. We still do get we're launching it next week. Can you do a usability test ones? But no, the earlier the better because there's so much more. So it's really that. If they often say, well, I often say, user experience is the next competitive battleground. It's the kind of thing because companies are typically fighting over very little margin in terms of their service level or their price level, et cetera. It's often very little difference between it. But the companies that really, that people gravitate to are the ones that offer the better experience. It's been shown, and there's various graphs I always think of here that show a really strong correlation between those companies that have the most active and strongest user experience design team, by whatever name you want to call it, and the growth of their company. There is a very strong correlation. So, companies like Amazon and Apple and stuff on the enormous side, but even much smaller companies that when you've got an innovative product, especially I'd say, even if you've got a very innovative product or service, that's the time to really consider the best way to make it work for your end users, and that's where we can help. There's typically, I think, 3 things. Are they understanding the proposition? Because sometimes it goes right over their head or it's not compelling. If it's a process that goes over lots of different touch points or steps or period of time, that's a big risk area. And then there's the whole for given touch point or interface, what does it look like and stuff, and am I getting the right, am I typing in the right information, understanding it. So those 3 things, the proposition, process, and interface is what I see as the key things. And if you have any doubts on those areas and you want to make sure that they are as good as they can be so that the business can really benefit from it, then that's why they should get in touch with us.
Great. I think I'll be in touch for my SaaS platform, my booking hub, we're just taking to market. So yeah, definitely it's the special sauce. Right. That's
a good way. Yeah, it's a good way to put it. It is. We're quite happy to point out the things that we don't do. We're not a SEO consultancy. We're not a back-end technology company in any sense. We can speak those languages to a fair degree, but if you want to know about the the user experience and get that designed as best possible, that's what we do.
Great. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to cover?
Not really. I think, I think I've just enjoyed, talking about it. It's a bit slightly a trip down memory lane to casting my mind back as to, for instance, what the challenges have been. But no, this has been fun.
I found it fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I could talk for hours.
It is, yes, yeah.